11 years have passed since Lewis put the Ringworld back into a stable orbit. Since then, Speaker, or Shmi as he was now called, has gone to live on the map of Earth with his Kzinti females. Lewis has been living with a small river tribe for a while now, and the hindmost has stayed inside his ship, trapped under miles of lava. Lewis has been wallowing in his guilt over having killed 1 trillion people to save the Ringworld, but the hindmost believes nowhere near that number were killed, maybe a few million maximum, depending on how many people lived on the Spill Mountains at the edge of the Ringworld. But as it is sparsely populated, probably not even that many. Lewis doesn't see how a protector could be that wrong, but the hindmost says that his computers are beyond what Protector Leela could have guessed. He tells Lewis that his ship's computers were able to direct most of the solar flare's radiation at the Ringworld rim jets, where it would actually be useful, instead of spraying across the central plains between the rim walls, where it would just be deadly radiation. Lewis believes it's more likely that the hindmost is lying in an attempt to get him to help him escape the Ringworld than it is that Tila was wrong. So the hindmost sends out his probes and spying devices so he can record the people that should be dead, living, and then wants to show this to Lewis. But if the hindmost cannot find people that Lewis knows, then there is no proof it's not either an old recording or from somewhere else. So the hindmost finds Vala Virgilin, the machine person woman who had helped Lewis get into the floating library that was kept by some of the last of the city builders. Once again, we find out that Lewis's tampering has had unintended side effects. Lewis had tried to help a tribe of grass giants whose homeland ranges were being taken over by slaver sunflowers, deadly bioengineered flowers that would reflect light at anything that moved, cooking it to death, like an ant under a magnifying glass. His solution had been to create a thick artificial cloud cover by boiling a sea, so that the flowers would die off without the direct sunlight they needed to survive. But his cloud cover had created habitat for the local vampire race, a nocturnal evolutionary branch of hominids that drank blood and emitted pheromones to hunt their prey. A powerful pheromone that drove out all logic of the minds of their victims. Lewis had already run into this trap. It is how he and Vala Virgilin first met. Lewis was trying to save her group of people from the pursuing vampires, but Lewis himself had been caught by the unexpected pheromones. And the next thing he knew, he was waking up the next morning in Vala's arms. Only Lewis's Kzinti companion, Speaker, had kept them both from becoming food for the vampires. Now these vampires were using the cloud cover Lewis had created to breed and expand their hunting grounds. Their population had exploded in this new favorable environment. Vala's trading caravan had united with several other races in an attempt to defend themselves from this scourge that came at night, and hindmost had been tracking her progress to show to Lewis. She had already been involved in several intense battles and lost several of her party. The effects of the vampire pheromones were different for each race of people. Not so much for the lust they caused, but for the results of the next day. Each species had a different view of Rishathra, interspecies mating, as well as for mating within their own species. This caused trouble for all races, but never caused as much trouble as it did for the Red Herder race, who prized their fidelity and monogamous relationships, but who were just as helpless against the pheromones as any other race, despite their bravado and claims to the contrary. Eventually, the inevitable happened, and after that, the Red Herder couple that was traveling with Vala broke up and separated out of hate and jealousy. This allowed a third party to enter the mix, and as the hindmost and Lewis watched the recordings, they noticed a protector shadowing the lone Red Herder from the bushes, helping him at times and guiding him. To what? For what reason? Now Lewis must know. Now the hindmost had his attention again. A protector loose on the Ringworld was a dangerous thing for invaders from outside the Ringworld like Lewis, and a battle between protectors could result in the end of the Ringworld itself. Finally, Lewis begins to talk to the hindmost again, and begins to believe what the hindmost has been telling him. He didn't kill 1 trillion people to save the Ringworld. Lewis finally starts to believe this, but he still feels the guilt because he had made his decision believing that it would kill them. How could he face the people he thought he had murdered? In the meantime, Vala has changed her goal from creating a trade route to stopping the vampire menace. Her people, the machine people, have much more advanced tech than the other hominid species in the area, so they combine their tech with the size and brute strength of the grass-eater giants, the incredible vision of the small red herders, the speed of the tiny gleaners, and the knowledge of many other races, including the ghouls, the carrion-eating hominids. They discover that the vampires have a main nest beneath an old abandoned city builder floating factory city. Thousands of them live there in the permanent shadow of the factory city. On the Ringworld, it was either noon with the sun directly above, or it was night with the shadow squares blocking out the sun. So the shadow was always directly beneath the factory, no matter what time of day it was, providing shelter from the sun for these nocturnal vampires. Vala and her brigade traveled to the mountains near the factory to scout it out. What they saw beneath the factory sent their skin crawling. The vampires not only were in greater number than anyone had ever seen before, they seemed to be evolving. Some groups of vampires seemed to be keeping other hominids as livestock. They even witnessed a fight between two groups of vampires, where one side tried to steal the slave hominids from the others, surely intending on eating them alive, as they normally did, but the other vampires were protecting them and keeping them alive to feed on repeatedly. Many of these slaves, or farm animals, seemed to be staying voluntarily. Maybe the pheromones had caused a permanent or semi-permanent Munchausen syndrome, or maybe they had confused their victims into thinking they really were in love with the vampires. Either way, this was the first time anyone had seen vampires keep livestock. The factory above had a spiral ramp coming down from its bottom, but the ramp stopped a few dozen feet above the ground. Teger was the name of the male red herder that had separated from his mate and the rest of Vala's group after his mate, in the grips of the pheromones, mated with the other members of the group. Teger, who was unwittingly being helped by a protector he called Whisper, made his way beneath the floating factory in a depressed mind state. He didn't care if he lived, but he wanted to kill some vampires for what they had done to his marriage, to his life. He could never go back to his tribe and face the shame of being the only red herder to be cheated on in all of their remembered history. The protector, Whisper, however, had other plans. Before Teger had left Vala's group, Whisper gave Teger clues and hints that led him to Vala's backpack, and the superconductor cloth she had gotten from Lewis Wu 10 years before that was inside it. And now Whisper was hinting to Teger that he needed to go to a strange metal outcropping in the middle of the river that flowed beneath the factory. Despite wondering if he was mad, hearing a disembodied voice, Teger made his way there, almost succumbing to the vampires and their scent. But when he got there, he found a way into the structure. It turned out to be an ancient flying machine of some type, and he was in its cockpit, surrounded by vampires just outside. The end seemed near to Teger. But while he was in this contraption, he was going to explore the small area he had as much as he could. He began to open compartments and pull off panels, and as he stared at the machinery inside, a thought came to him. It looked like something was missing in areas, and below those areas were small lines of dust. All he had to span the gaps was the superconducting cloth. So he tried it. It looked like it would fit between the contact points. So he began to cut slices and try them here and there. Lights came on when he made some contacts, so he continued to fiddle. And suddenly, he shot up into the sky. The machine must have been on some kind of autopilot, because it flew up to the factory and landed at the parking garage. Okay, a quick side note. As someone who has a little experience with wiring and electricity, this plot point always bothered me. From the description, I always got the impression that he was spanning short gaps in the electrical system where the superconductor cloth used to be. Almost like a fuse in your car. But a fuse and superconductor are opposite ends of the spectrum. A fuse is designed to be a weak spot in the system. It's designed to heat up and burn out, shorting out the system to keep it from damaging itself. Superconductor, on the other hand, would never burn out. It's a perfect conductor. So what is the purpose of it in these systems? It's not a safety, like a fuse, and if they can get the power to these short sections where the superconducting cloth is needed, then they can get it past that point too. Linking with the superconductor would be no better than just having the same metal that got the power to that gap to link that gap. So either Teger should have had to completely rewire the ship, or the ship shouldn't have needed superconductor at all. And this goes for everything in all 4 Ringworld novels. Every time they use the superconductor cloth, they use it like a fuse. They don't run the entire ship off of the superconducting wire, and where they do use it, they don't need it. Now, I know this is just a plot point by Larry Niven to keep the story moving, and he probably has never wired a car or a house or anything like that, but it still bothers me. Anyway, back to the story. From up here in the factory city, Teger began to explore, and as he did so, he discovered more equipment with missing contacts. He used more and more of the superconducting cloth until he had every light in the factory on, but he could find no controls to lower or raise the spiral ramp. And when he went down and inspected the ramp, he found there was nothing to raise or lower on it. Everything was made solid, with no places for hinges or hydraulic pistons. The ramp did not raise or lower. So then how did it get so high off the ground? Teger continued to ponder this question as he explored the city. Finally, something came to him. There were pools and cisterns all over the city, but every single one of them was drained. How much would several thousand cubic yards of water weigh? So would that affect the factory? Teger plugged up all the drains, and as the almost constant rains in the area fell from the clouds Louis Wu had made, the city began to slowly lower. The rest of Vala's team noticed this and set out to the ramp, where after fighting off the vampires at the bottom, they made their way up the ramp and were reunited with Teger, who was protected by the bright lights of the city. The vampires were either not willing or not able to move around in full daylight. But they were still no closer to stopping the vampire epidemic, and now they were all trapped above the vampires. After a while of everyone inspecting the factory city and the massive fountain beneath it, they realized there was lighting on the bottom of the factory. They just had to figure out where the power to it was. Eventually, with some difficulty and a little innovation, they found the lights, powered them, and turned them on. Pandemonium broke out beneath the factory city as the nocturnal vampires were all blasted with blazing light. They ran in every direction to escape, and Vala and her group used this confusion to escape down the ramp and get away from the city, ending the vampire scourge. The group celebrated and they all headed back home. But before leaving the factory city, the 2 ghouls in the group, the species of hominids that specialized in eating hominid carrion, cut one of the hindmost spying devices from a wall of the floating factory city. They had a plan for it, but would not reveal their goals. Louis Wu, having seen a protector and watching the ghouls take the spy device on a long journey towards the rim wall, knew that something was happening, something big, but he did not know what. So he agreed to finally return to the hindmost after 11 years separated. After negotiating a contract between the two, as no sane man would work for a puppeteer without one, the hindmost sent Louis his refueling probe with a stepping disc attached to it, a device that would teleport anything on it from one disc to another. Louis stepped onto the disc and saw out of the corner of his eye a dark shadow leaping towards him. "Something's following me, hindmost." But there was plenty going on here. Thousands of Pearson's puppeteers shifted and swirled and kicked stage left. It might have been distracting, but it wasn't. Louis and Shmi had learned to ignore that part of the ship. That was the hindmosts, and the wall wasn't glass. It was the invulnerable stuff a general products hall was made of. But one 2-headed, 3-legged alien, his mane curled and bejeweled in formal fashion, was between the kitchen wall and a coffin as big as a transfer booth lying on its side. A knobby old man in a floppy vest was running at the hindmost, knees and elbows pumping. A hidden stepping disc led to the hindmost's quarters. The hindmost must be near or on it, Lewis thought. He would be invulnerable there. Instinct must have been too strong. The hindmost turned his back instead. It all happened very fast. Lewis was still catching his balance. The hindmost was spinning around, head splayed wide apart, looking back, binocular vision with a baseline of 3 feet, sighting on his target. His hind leg folded forward and shot straight back as the knobby man attacked. The hindmost's kick was good, square on target. Lewis heard a clank. The knobby man must have been wearing a chest plate. Armor or no, that kick would have knocked a normal hominid into a coma. The knobby man turned with the impact, feet off the floor, one hand on the hindmost's ankle to borrow its momentum as the hindmost pulled back for another kick. The knobby man stepped past the hoof and slammed a fist down hard on the puppeteer's bejeweled mane, where the two necks connected to the torso. That was the hindmost's skull. And Lewis was bringing the flash around. Too slow, too clumsy. The stunned puppeteer was in the way. Something whacked his right wrist and sent the flashlight laser flying. A metal ball? Another knocked the variable knife spinning. Lewis flinched violently away from his spinning wire blade. The hindmost was down, curled into a ball, heads and long neck tucked between his forelegs. The floor was ankle deep in water. The fallen flash was submerged, but it sent a thread of light through Needle's transparent hull and into the lava beyond. The wire blade hadn't cut Lewis in two, blind luck, but his hand and wrist felt shattered. He was way off balance, and the knobby man was coming at him. Protector. Lewis rolled off the stepping disc and onto the corner and started to stand up. His right wrist was a sea of pain. The left was only numb. In the space where he had been, something huge flickered in on all fours. It stood erect, as big as an orange bear, holding a small cannon in one huge hand. The knobby man spun and ducked and swept Lewis's variable knife past the big intruder, the Kazin. The Kazin's weapon flew away with big clawed fingers still attached. The Kazin froze in a crouch, throttling a howl. The knobby man held the flash, too, in a clear threat.
You don't move. Web Dweller, you don't move either. Lewis Wu, you don't move. Does your contract call for you to die?
The knobby man's lips had withdrawn from the gums. The gums had hardened almost to bone, and jawbone had grown through in jagged pattern. His face was hard, almost a beak. He spoke with a breathy speech impediment, but in interspeak. How would the knobby man have learned interspeak? Eavesdropping on the hindmost? Contract? Reality came in waves, washing past pain. 11 years since he'd been in this much trouble. Lewis said, stalling, "Yes, under conditions subject to my own sole judgment. Do you accept my contract?"
"Yes,"
said the knobby man. And just like that, the single protector had taken a human, a puppeteer, and a Kazin and turned them into his servants. He had reprogrammed the hindmost stepping discs to teleport himself in before anyone else as soon as that specific disc was activated, thereby arriving when the hindmost expected Lewis, giving him the benefit of surprise. But even the protector had not expected Shmi's son, Acolyte, to be stalking Lewis Wu and to jump on the stepping disc right after him. Unfortunately, Acolyte did not know what a protector was, and therefore did not act in time to kill him when he had the chance. Luckily for him, the autodoc could repair his severed hand, so in he went, after also agreeing to bind himself to the protector under the contract that Lewis had written. Lewis watched as the protector reprogrammed the stepping disc system again, and he learned from him that he was originally from a vampire species before he changed. He and a large number of other vampires were able to take down a protector, and when they drank its blood, the protector virus entered their bodies, and the few survivors of the attack transformed into protectors themselves. This protector gave no name, so Lewis dubbed him Bram. After Shmi's son emerged from the autodoc, Lewis entered it. When he awoke, he was in his 20-year-old body, and he was alone on the ship. He fiddled with the controls of the stepping discs as he had seen Bram do and tried to reprogram them himself. After sending 2 test objects, he believed he had succeeded, and he stepped onto the disc. He was glare blind and way off balance. He convulsed like a sea anemone, reaching between his knees for anything solid. Eyes squinted shut against the raw sunlight. His gloved fingers brushed something and closed hard. The badly tilted stepping disc slid under him by a foot or 2. He was gripping the rim of the disc itself, he hoped. He held very still. The photosensitive faceplate turned smoky gray. Still crouching, gripping the edge of the stepping disc, he looked about him. The map of Mars wasn't a very good map. He could see 100 shades of red without moving, but the sky was the dark blue of high-altitude Earth. The sun was too bright for Mars. Nothing could be done about the gravity either. Maybe it didn't matter to the Martians. They lived safe from the sunlight, beneath sand fine enough to behave like a viscous fluid. Perhaps the sand would even buoy them against the Ringworld's gravity. He'd expected to be at Mons Olympus, and it seemed he was. He was a long ways up. The stepping disc rested near the top of a smooth 45-degree slope of piled dust, and it was starting to slide again. What had the hindmost been thinking of to put it here? Yeah, Martians. They'd set the trap. Sliding faster now, losing all stability, it was a long way down. Miles. Dust must have piled here over millennia in a prevailing wind. A great ocean stratospheric wind in a weather pattern huger than worlds. Another flaw in the accuracy of the map of Mars. Lewis squatted, flattened himself against the stepping disc as it became a sled. It picked up speed. The disc was trying to bounce him off. His hands held a death grip, and he tried to grip with his boot toes too. An arcology-sized rock stood in his path. He leaned left, trying to steer. Nope, it was going to swat him hard. Then he was elsewhere. And his death grip became something more, because he was falling into a black void. He chopped off part of a shrill scream. But I'd fixed it! I fixed it! I fixed it! He was clinging to a stepping disc welded to a gracefully curved cigar shape, the puppeteer's refueling probe. Around him was black sky and a glare of stars. The stepping disc, the probe's hull, everything glowed. There must be light behind him. Without losing anything of his toe and finger grip, Lewis twisted to look over his shoulder. The Ringworld was adrift behind and below him. He could see fine details. Rivers like twisted snakes, undersea landscapes, a straight black thread that might be a machine people highway. The naked sun was trying to broil him. No problem, the suit was one he could sweat through. Night would be a greater threat. He hadn't thought he would need an oversuit. He was level with the top of the rim wall, looking down at half-conical spill mountains and the rivers that ran from their bases. 1,000 miles up, far ahead of him, he could make out lacy lines sketching a long double cone. An attitude jet. He could see the twin toroids that he'd thought made up a bussard ramjet, but they were tiny, forming the wasp waist of something far larger. The Ringworld's attitude jet was made of wire so thin it kept fading in and out of sight, a cage to guide the flow of the solar wind. This one wasn't mounted yet. It wasn't pointed right. Lewis hadn't felt fear like this in 200 years. But I got the bread back! The probe was coasting, was motionless, while the Ringworld rotated below at 770 miles per second. The system must have reset. I took this one disk out of the link, but it must have reset. I don't understand the hindmost's programming language. What else have I fouled up? The sashimi? That was easy. The plate must have drifted too far from the disk. The bread hadn't. It was still in range when the discs cycled. He hung on, and the disc bumped against his faceplate. He clung with his eyes closed. He was in no shape to confront anyone, any creature. In a few seconds, he'd be safe and alone aboard the Hot Needle of Inquiry. A great clawed hand took him by the shoulder and rolled him over. So Lewis ended up on the Hidden Patriarch. a massive ship that would dwarf a supertanker that the Ringworld Kazin had built long before to invade the map of Earth. On the ship with him were the two city builders he had met in the last novel, Harkaby Parolin and Koarask Sinjajok, along with the hindmost and Shmi's son Acolyte, and most importantly of all, Bram. Lewis finds out that 6 months have passed since he entered the autodock. Bram had told the hindmost to keep him in hibernation until he was needed, and now that the ghouls carrying the hindmost spying device had almost reached the rim wall of the Ringworld, he was needed. But he still did not know what they were up to. The ghouls clearly wanted to show him something, but what? Bram took Lewis through the stepping discs to the Ringworld's meteor defense room, where he showed him several things. The Ringworld was being invaded by humans as well as the Khazinti. Bram had shot down many ships already and was currently shooting down more. Far out in the edge of the star system, there was another surprise. An outsider ship was watching. The strange, plant-like aliens with tech far beyond what any human or Kazin could understand. And the final surprise was a skeleton, set up like a museum exhibit in a standing posture, looking like it was ready to attack. Bram told Lewis more details about how he came to be and how he came to rule over the Ringworld. Just over 1700 years ago, something happened. He was a mindless vampire living under a city attached to the ring wall itself, but the city was failing. The people tried to leave, but the masses of vampires underneath them prevented it. A protector lived there, one that ruled over the entire Ringworld itself. He had made Spill Mountain protectors to help him, seeing as he could easily hold their tiny communities hostage, forcing them to be his loyal servants or else risk the only thing they cared about, their lineage. As all protectors were instinctually forced to place their lineage above all else. The head protector had no problem escaping, but the subservient protectors had their people living in the city. They had to help them, so they devised armor transports for them, and they left. And as they left, one protector stayed behind to ensure their escape and buy as much time as possible. The battle must have been epic. A lone protector, one of the greatest warriors the galaxy had ever known, against a horde of hungry vampires, desperate to eat, surrounding them. It seems that the protector almost won. He must have killed hundreds, if not thousands, but finally, the last of the vampires overtook the exhausted and wounded protector and drank its blood. Of those, only 4 were of the right age to make the change into protector when the virus in the blood got into their veins. And when those 4 awoke, 2 already trusted each other, so they joined forces to kill the others. As the world around them started to become more clear to their newly sentient brains, they realized they had to take over the Ringworld for the sake of their lineage. Only they could be trusted with the fate of their families. So they set out to find the lead protector, the one that had created the one they ate, the one who ruled over the entire Ringworld. So they set a trap for him and waited. Bram had Lewis study the skeleton in the meteor defense room to hear his thoughts. This was the protector that 1700 years ago had controlled the entire Ringworld. According to Bram, it had lived for around 30,000 years before he and his partner, Anne, had killed it. This skeleton was a mystery to Lewis because its features suggested that it was from a carrion-eating species, so it was not one of the first protectors from the Pack homeworld. It had become a protector long enough after the Ringworld had lost its original Pack overseers that his species had evolved quite a bit, something which no living Pack protector would have allowed. But this protector was also clearly different than the ghoul species that currently covered much, if not all, of the Ringworld today. So why did this protector allow a competing ghoul species to take over the Ringworld? One undeniable instinct of any protector was that it protected its own lineage over all else. The only conclusion that Lewis could come to was that as a carrion eater, this hominid's sense of smell and the reactions those smells elicited in its brain had changed. Wires had become crossed. For example, a normal hominid is repulsed by the smell of decaying flesh, but a carrion eater is attracted to that same scent. So maybe the wires in its brain were mixed up so that this protector, instead of feeling a need to kill all other lineages, instead were attracted to them, as these species were the food for their family. If this protector did as most others would do and wiped out all other genetic variations of hominids, then it would also be killing its own kind, as they would no longer have any food to eat but their own corpses. And this would obviously cause a downward spiral where soon they would have no food at all, as it takes 10,000 calories of food to create 1,000 calories of meat. Every generation's food reserves would decrease to less than 1/10 of the previous generation's food reserves, causing extinction in only a few generations. This also had the side effect that instead of killing all genetic variations of his own species, he was able to tolerate them and even guide their evolution to what he saw as perfection. So maybe this protector was related to the current ghoul species after all, which would explain their prevalence on the Ringworld. They had been protected and even guided by a protector for 30,000 years. Bram ordered the hindmost to move his refueling probe, or now, more accurately, his spying probe, with its stepping disc attached to the outside of the Ringworld wall, where they found how Tila and the protectors she had made had moved the massive Ringworld ramjets back into their original positions on the wall. She had used the section of maglev track along the top of the Ringworld wall that the city builders were in the process of building when their civilization collapsed. She had extended it over the rim and down to the docking ledge where the returning city builder ships had landed. She had used all the ramjets she could get her hands on. So then why was there what appeared to be another ramjet motor on the ledge, and why did it look like it may be in the process of being built? When Tila had died, it was possible that some of the protectors she had made to help her survived, or, more likely, her servants had created other protectors of their species without her knowledge. Maybe these protectors had begun to build new motors to replace those that had been taken. Suddenly, the probe flared and they lost signal. Bram sent Acolyte through the stepping discs to spray a new spying device and then return. When the hindmost was able to bring his camera back online, they had their answer. A vampire protector came into the view to study the wreckage, but suddenly it was attacked and killed, and a new shadow flashed by the camera. It was Anne, Bram's partner. After that, the scene was empty. Lewis asked the hindmost why Acolyte had not returned yet. In his cowardice, the hindmost admitted he had left the returning links set to Olympus Mons on the map of Mars. This meant that if the Martians had set another trap, Acolyte had walked right into it, completely unprepared, thinking he was coming back home. So Lewis jumped on the stepping disc. He was almost killed by Anne on the spaceport ledge before he flicked through to Olympus Mons. Luckily, he had his floating cargo discs with him this time, because hundreds of feet beneath him was Acolyte's crumpled body. The Martians had placed the disc over a long drop onto rocks. In his desperation to save Acolyte, who probably weighed around 400 pounds, Lewis dislocated his shoulder and slipped a disc in his spine, along with several other injuries. But Acolyte was far worse. He was lucky to be alive at all, and so he was placed into the autodock first, where he did not come out for several days. In the meantime, Anne had set up a trap. She removed the stepping disc from the destroyed probe, but left the rest of it on the maglev track. This forced another group of protectors to come and clean it off. Seeing this, Bram jumped on the stepping disc and disappeared. 3 new protectors appeared on the video feed. One was a vampire protector, the other 2 Spill Mountain protectors. Suddenly Bram appeared and cut the vampire protector in half, and Anne appeared out of nowhere. Seeing themselves evenly matched, the Spill Mountain protectors hesitated, and Bram and Anne capitalized on this to offer them a deal. Betray your master, and Bram and Anne would not wipe out your people. They instead offered a different deal. They would stay out of the fight and serve whoever won. This was acceptable to Bram and Anne. From these protectors, they learned that only one vampire protector remained, other than Bram and Anne, who were of a different species of vampire, of course. So, it was two different groups of two different species of vampires fighting over control of the Ringworld, and the score, so far, was 2-0. With the deal made, Anne stayed on the rim wall, but Bram returned to the ship. The ghouls finally reached the rim wall with the spying device, and finally, Lewis and the hindmost spoke through it to them. It turns out they had found the port the protectors were using to get outside the Ringworld to the spaceport ledge on the outside, where they were building the new ramjet motors. They had also found the species of high mountain dwellers that they had enslaved and turned some of them into subservient protectors, just like the old ruler of the Ringworld. They also learned that the protector they had seen guiding Teger was actually Anne. Anne and Whisper were the same protector. A few days later, there was a change in the hindmost's web-eye viewers. Anne had somehow taken control of the newly built ramjet motor and was moving it down the maglev track at high speeds. Seeing this, Bram again departed through the stepping discs. The view ahead hadn't changed. The track ran on and on. The barge and its unwieldy cargo might be decelerating, but even at high G, it would take a while. Lewis wondered if Whisper was planning to ram the terminus. King, the last remaining enemy vampire protector, might be wondering the same thing. Nah, in 10 hours at 770 miles a second, she'd covered around 24 million miles, but the track ran on for 200 million miles, and where in that length was her target? She couldn't give King that much time to shoot her. Where, for that matter, was King? The vampire protector could be anywhere if he'd trained high-point protectors to mount the ramjets for him. What was that? Maglev's sled, the small variety, almost lost on the vast track, coming straight towards the window, now veering from side to side and slowing, matching speed with the barge. Contact. And 5 matching pressure suits were past the web-eye before Lewis could blink. The hindmost whistle chimed, and the view reversed, and gone. They had already disappeared into the maze of coils. 5 matching pressure suits would be 5 spill mount protectors. Stet. They'd guard the ramjet, protect it from stray effects of a battle, serving both sides. For King, they would also serve as a distraction, and anyone who had ever watched a magic act might guess that one of the 5 was King himself. His suit bulked out with additional weapons or armor. Where were they? Action far aft. Lewis couldn't make it out. This was going to be frustrating, he thought. He glanced at the Kazin. Would Acolyte freak out? But he was watching with the patience of a cat at a mouse hole. Traces of motion, distant flashes of light, and 2 maglev sleds were weaving through the coils. Sporadic flashes of light followed them. They dipped below view, then rose. One struck a coil and rebounded into an actinic blast, crashed into another coil, and was out, over the edge of the track. Gone. Clever, Lewis whispered, and lowered his gaze to the bed of the barge, but there was nothing to be seen. The hindmost said,
Lewis?
Whisper had the little sleds following the barge right aft where King couldn't see them. I only saw 2, but maybe there were more, all slave to the one she was in. And which one is that? Now she's dipped them all and rolled clear and sent them up again for King to shoot at. Even if King's figured it out by now, it puts her in 2 places, and Whisper knows where he is, and I could be completely wrong.
The barge will stop soon. Then the dueling field expands. Stet Lewis?
Ye gods, if you're right, if... Bram flicked in. Light slashed where he had been, but Bram was among the superconductor loops and firing back with Lewis's flash. Light flared among the loops, a storm of energy beams. Bram stood up, holding his suit together with one hand. The first beam hadn't missed. It was hellishly intense, having gotten through the laser shielding on Lewis's suit. Now, 2 tiny man-shapes were firing among the loops, leaping, firing, chewing up the ramjet. Lewis said, I just... and stopped.
Share it.
Acolyte spat. Light doesn't hurt a superconductor. They're all 3 using light weapons. If King had known... Bram would be dead if he didn't get to safety soon. He'd taken cover behind a thick loop of ramjet and was watching, just watching. Likely, Bram had no better idea than he did, Lewis thought, as to which man-shape was Whisper, which was King. He'd done what he could. One combatant flared like a sun and dissolved. The other flared brighter and was gone faster. 4 shapes leaped like fleas, a pincer closing on Bram. Lewis started to laugh. Bram ran for the stepping disc. He blazed like a sun, then he was gone. Here, off the stepping disc, throwing back his helmet, pulling in air in great gasps. His pressure suit glowed dull red in spots. He stripped it away, keeping the gloves on until he was clear of the rest, hurled the suit into the shower and turned it on. Lewis was still laughing. An acolyte seemed to be smiling widely, but on a Kzinti that was no smile.
One of you will tell me what happened.
Whisper is dead and I am alone. Is there more to know? King's protector servants were to guard the ramjet and barge while we fought. But we 3 came to fight a war on a superconducting field, under superconducting coils. We all chose energy weapons. Stet acolyte, the Arch lives by the rim ramjets. We are protectors.
Stet.
4 protector servants saw that none of us could harm the transport or the ramjet. Whisper and I thought they would kill the losers, but they saw 2 dying and 1 unwary, and they struck to free themselves from us entirely. I must have seemed easy meat, witless ones. If they saw me flick in, couldn't they guess I would flick out?
Bram looked at the web-eye window glowing in the hindmost cabin. 4 protectors in high-point pressure suits gathered around the stepping disc. Their helmet lights blinked heliograph patterns. One looked up into the window, then all 4 eased around, out of view. The window went to moire patterns.
That won't save them. Hindmost, why was there a link made between the Weaver Town and the Meteor Defense Room?
Ask Lewis Wu.
Lewis?
One does not reproach a Pearson's puppeteer for cowardice. Lewis barely glanced at the hindmost. It's the morals clause, Bram. I've judged you unfit to rule the ring world. Bram's hand was a vice on Lewis's left shoulder, lifting. Lewis could see the Kzin bristling, trying to decide whether to interfere.
By what unjustifiable arrogance could a breeder? It's Tila, isn't it?
What?
She forced you to kill her. She forced you to kill hundreds of millions of Spill Mountain folk in order to push the Arch back into place. Of course, she had to die in order to save the hostages she had given me. Of course, the Arch would have impacted the sun without plasma to feed the rim ramjets. But why did she impose these tasks on you?
All right, why? Bram had set Lewis on his feet, but his grip hadn't relaxed.
I've read your record on the ship's computer. You open problems, then abandon them.
Lewis believed he was prepared to die, but this was turning weird. What problems, Bram?
You found a dangerous alien species in interstellar space. You opened negotiations. You showed them the way to your world, then left professional ambassadors to try and deal with them. Tila Brown you carried to the Ringworld, then left her to another's care.
Tange, damn it, Bram, she made her own choice.
Orla Prilila you brought to Earth, then allowed the arm to take her. She died.
Lewis was silent.
Despite Tila, still you have ignored your responsibility for 43 Fallons. Only the fear of death brought you back here. But you understood her message, didn't you, Lewis?
That is completely...
You must trust the Ringworld's safety. She trusted your wisdom, Lewis, and not her own. She was half right, half bright.
The hindmost spoke from safety behind the kitchen wall.
Tila was not wise. Protectors are not wise. Their motives don't come from the forebrain. Lewis, she may have been just wise enough.
Hindmost, that's ridiculous, Lewis said. Bram, I'm naturally arrogant. You're being too clever. Bright people do a lot of that.
What shall I do about the protectors that killed my mate?
We'll ask the High Point people if we can please talk to a protector. We'll tell them that they are in charge of the Rim. Bram, Spill Mountain protectors have every interest in protecting the Ringworld from any danger. Anything that happens hurts the Rim Wall first, and who should know that better than they do? Bram blinked.
Yes, next. I have ruled in the repair center for more than 7,000 Fallons. How do you judge me?
I know what you did. The dates, Bram, the dates. You didn't even try to hide them.
You talk to too many kinds. You travelled too far. How could I lie? You might have learned.
I am bewildered.
Lewis had nearly forgotten the kin. He said, he and Whisper searched for the mysterious Master Protector for how long, Bram? Hundreds of Fallons? But it wasn't enough. Even using the telescope display in the repair center, the Ringworld is too big. But if you know where a protector will be, you can be there first. A disaster lures protectors, like Bram. You'll have to do something about that armed carrier ship, won't you, Bram?
Yes.
Whisper and Bram found a large mass falling towards the Ringworld. That was all they needed. Kronos, the old protector, would have to do something about that. He'd come to the repair center. Whisper and Bram would be ready. Step, Bram? Silence. Maybe Kronos knew how to stop the impact. Bram and Whisper would have waited, right? See if he could do it. But Bram knew something was wrong.
Lewis, we think it was his habit. His first move was to set up defenses. We couldn't.
Bram's fingers were sinking into Lewis's shoulder, drawing blood. Lewis said, "You killed him before he could finish."
We moved almost too late. He and we stalked each other. He and we had mapped these vast spaces and set traps.
Bram was speaking to Acolyte now, telling of a duel to one who loved such tales.
Anne was crippled for a lifetime. I still don't know how he shattered my hip and leg in the dark. We killed him.
Lewis said, "And then?"
He didn't know either, Lewis. We searched his tools. He brought nothing.
Whatever he had, he never got to use it. You and Whisper, you had no ideas at all.
Acolyte.
You let Fist of God hit the Ringworld.
Acolyte. An enemy waits for me in the meteor defense room. Here is your Watsai. Go and kill my enemy.
Yes.
Bram whistle trilled into his eccentric flute. The Kazin stepped forward and flicked out. Lewis tried to follow, but Bram's fingers were sunk deep in his shoulder. Lewis said, "You blood-sucking free mother."
You know where I must be, but I decide the rest. Come.
Bram and Lewis were on the stepping disc and gone. So Bram and Anne had directly caused the catastrophe that was the Fist of God impact, a disaster that had surely killed billions at the low end of the estimate. Because of this, Lewis had opened a stepping disc link from Weavertown, where he knew Kazarp and Toonsmith would be, to the Meteor Defense Room, a place where both Tree of Life grew and where Bram would be forced to go to stop the ongoing invasion of the Ringworld by the Arm and Kazin. Lewis had set up a trap for Bram, just as Bram had set up a trap for the Ancient Protector Kronos. Only this time, if Bram did not deal with the threat, in his absence, Lewis could. Lewis had made a new ghoul into a protector and left him in the same meteor defense room that Bram had killed the Ancient Protector Kronos in. Now, either Bram must win another fight in there or die as his predecessor did. The fight was short. The young Kazin may not have made much of a difference, but he was the deciding factor in it. He distracted Bram for just long enough for the ghoul named Toonsmith, now a protector, to finish him. Now, the Ringworld was once again controlled by a ghoul protector, as it successfully was for 30,000 years before Bram and Anne caused the worst disaster in its entire history. Did that mean the Ringworld was safe for another 30,000 years? Only time would tell. Hey, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you staying this long, and since you did, hopefully that means you like my channel. So I'd really appreciate it if you would like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe, so I can see you back here for the next one. Take care.